A reading from Mark's Gospel. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons.
Have you ever come down with a fever? Anybody? Yeah. I heard a great story this past week about a woman who was ill with a fever. It was a 98-year-old Mother Superior in Ireland who, because of this elongated fever, was now on her deathbed. And all the nuns in the convent had gathered around Mother Superior to help comfort her as she passes on to be with God. One of the nuns tried to give the Mother Superior some warm milk to drink, but the Mother Superior refused, and quickly another nun took that glass back to the kitchen, and finding in the cabinet a bottle of Irish whiskey, she poured a generous amount of that Irish whiskey into the warm milk, scurried back to the Mother Superior's bed. The nun held the glass to the mother's lips, saying, "Please, Mother, you must drink." Mother Superior took a small sip. Then with a look of surprise on her face, she took another sip. And then before you knew it, she reached out, took the glass, and she drained the whole thing. "Mother," the nun said, "Mother, with earnest, please, now that you're alert, what great wisdom do you have to share with us before you leave?" The Mother Superior opened her eyes. She fixed her gaze upon that anxious group of sisters, and she said, "Oh, my beloved, whatever you do, don't sell that cow." Well, sickbed insights are actually a part of our gospel message for today. So let's set some background. Mark's gospel was written somewhere around 72 AD when the Temple of Jerusalem lay in ruins. And the people of Israel, well, you might say that the people of Israel were quite feverish. They'd scattered far and wide. They were desperate, disconnected, detached. They were despairing because Rome had come and destroyed everything that they held as holy. The little band of people who were called the Way, who would one day be referred to as Christians, were especially fearful concerning what the future might hold for them. So how could the writer of Mark's gospel address them about what he knew to be their hope and their future and their salvation from their feverish state? His hand must have been trembling a bit as he began. The quill hit the page. First, he recalls a famous prophecy. Then he paints a picture of that memorable character, John the Baptist. And then he gives us this gritty battle between Jesus and Satan. And then this pronouncement of the coming kingdom of God. And then the call of some ordinary fishermen. And then this big show-stopping moment when Jesus cast a demon out of a man. Now, certainly by this time, the first hearers must have been sitting on the edge of their seat. Their palms are sweaty, their hearts are racing, their mouths are dry. They've been waiting so long to hear this portion of the Jesus story, the spectacular public figure of Jesus. And just as the author has these hearers in the palm of his hand, they're enthusiastic, they're motivated, they're inspired, they're animated, they're eager. He comes with this great story of the private, small healing of a woman with a fever. Are you kidding me? The story has begun with such drama. My gosh, the book has begun with such a spectacle. We got Satan, we have a demon, and all this writer can come up with now is a woman in her home with a fever. What a downer. I mean, everybody knew Jesus healed. That's not what they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear this big public Jesus. So why take the time? I mean, why would this author take the time to lift up, which is really only 2 lines, a small snippet about the private healing of a woman with a fever? Well, I guess the only way we could address that is to say that perhaps the writer of this story knows that hidden within this small, unassuming, private little story is a truth so powerful that he feels that people like you and like me who seek to follow Jesus need to hear it. So what might that truth be? Let's set the scene for today's story. It's Sabbath, the small town of Capernaum, north side of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus has just concluded his guest preaching role at the synagogue. And since Peter and Andrew were hometown boys, they bring Jesus home with them for some food and some rest. And when Jesus enters Peter's home, he encounters Peter's mother-in-law, who's ill in the bed with a fever, we're told. And what does Jesus do? Jesus does what he always does. He reaches out, he lifts her up, and she is healed. So there it is. Now, what is so important about this story? What truth is embedded so deeply in this narrative that the writer of Mark would put it in the very first chapter of his book? Some scholars have differing opinions about that. Let me tell you what I believe. I believe this truth is strikingly clear when we read again verse 31 of the story. Here's how it reads. Jesus came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her and she began to serve them. Jesus lifted her up, the fever left, and the woman began to serve. Did you see it? Did you notice this woman's reaction to her healing? Did you notice her reaction to it was immediate? There was no pausing, there was no waiting, there was no hesitating, there was no dilly-dallying, no delay, no dawdling. She's healed, and then she immediately begins to serve others. Could that be it? Could it be? Could that be why this story is playing such a prominent role in the first chapter of this gospel? So that from its prominent place, it can boldly claim for Jesus' followers back then, as well as Jesus' followers today, the truth that healthy, whole, and healed people whose lives have been lifted up and touched by Christ, people who have been saved from the brink, people who've been delivered out of their dilemmas, people who've been offered fresh starts and new beginnings, know what they need to do when they're touched by Jesus. They need to get up and they need to serve. And in fact, in the original Greek, the word used for serve in this text would have been diakoneo, which is the root word for our English words diaconate and deacon. Now, how about that? You see what it means? It means that when the original hearers would have heard this story, they certainly would have understood what this writer is attempting to say. That Peter's mother-in-law's getting up to serve means that she would be the first deacon. And with her getting out of bed and arising to serve, that would have been when the church was truly born. You know, I got to tell you, when the Greek scholar in my house first pointed this out to me, it gave me chill bumps. It gave me chill bumps. Really, which one of us does not know what it's like to come down with a fever? Because fevers come in many forms, don't they? And an elevated body temperature, that's only one. Because a fever in a metaphorical sense can be any condition that removes us from the creative and loving flow of life. Think about it. Fever of isolationism, the fever of cynicism, the fever of arrogance, or the fever of selfishness, the fever of bitterness, the fever of narcissism, the fever of righteousness. All these fevers, they possess the very real power, do they not? To back us up and pull us out from what it is we were meant to do by being created as beloved children of God. And here's the most disturbing thing. The most disturbing thing is that if these fevers go unchecked, they can become more than an annoyance. They can be, in fact, devastating, leading to a very slow and methodical inner decaying of our life. One of the great examples of Roman architecture is its aqueducts. One of them can still be seen in Segovia, Spain today. This Segovia aqueduct was built in the year 109 AD. For 1,800 years. 1,800 years it carried cool waters down from the mountain into the thirsty city of Segovia. Nearly 60 generations of Spaniards drank from its flow. But then came another generation, a recent one, who said, this aqueduct is so great a marvel, it ought to be preserved. It ought to be preserved for our children as a museum piece. So this generation put a board together, they had a capital campaign, and they decided to relieve of his 1,800-year-old service this aqueduct to the people. They laid modern iron pipes to carry the water in from the mountains. They drove steel rivets into the pipes to hold them together. They even came up with gasoline pumps that could push the water along the way. And when they concluded, they had a big black tie celebration, and they cheered their accomplishments. The ancient bricks and mortar of the aqueduct would no longer have to perform its heroic duty that it had done for all those centuries. Now it could have what it deserved, a reverent rest. Well, you know what happened? After a while, this Segovia aqueduct, which had stood since 109 AD, began to show a few cracks. And then it began to flake. And then it began to weaken. And soon the sun beating on the now dry mortar began to cause it to crumble a bit. And then the bricks and the stones began to sag. And they threatened to fall. And it was then that everyone in Segovia realized that what ages of service could not have destroyed in that aqueduct, idleness was able to disintegrate in only a short while. It's unbelievable, isn't it? When the flow of water, which was what this aqueduct was meant to do and to carry, was stopped, in time, without the aqueduct being put to its intended use, it slowly crumbled and it simply died. And you see, each one of us has been created by God with an intended use as well. That use being to allow God's living water to flow through us to others. And if we don't put our lives to that kind of use, in time, like that Segovia aqueduct, our lives will simply dry up and die as well. Yeah, your heart may still beat, okay? And you might still have some neurological activity in your brain. But when people look in your eyes and people hear the words from your mouth, they'll know your spirit is being dismantled slowly by the fevers of this world. I know people like that, don't you? Don't you? People with no joy, people with no spirit, people with no humor. They're like a dry aqueduct, could we suggest? Their spirited soul is simply crumbling and flaking under the weight of no desire to care about anybody but themselves. But what we need to know is that the service we offer, it doesn't have to be monumental. I mean, it doesn't have to be grand. Rather, it could be just like Simon's mother-in-law. It was simple. Did you notice that? Person to person, human love and caring, because that is service too. And even those seemingly small services may seem small to us, in God's world, the great news is that eventually they may impact the world in a whole new way that we will never be able to see. There's an old poem that captures this. Perhaps you've heard it as well. An old man going on a lone highway came at the evening cold and gray to a chasm vast and deep and wide, through which was flowing a sullen tide. The old man crossed in the twilight dim. That sullen stream held no fears for him. But then he turned when he reached the other side, and he built a bridge to span the tide. Old man, said a fellow pilgrim near, you're wasting strength in building here. Your journey will end with the ending day. You'll never again must pass this way. You've crossed the chasm deep and wide. Why build you a bridge at eventide? The builder lifted his old gray head. Good friend, in the path I have come, he said, there follow after me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. The chasm that has been naught to me, to that fair-haired youth may a pitfall be. He too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, you see, I'm building this bridge for him. Let me ask you, is there some service to the world which you are committed, that's building for others? Is there? Whether you find yourself late in life or the middle of life or just beginning the thrill of adulthood, is that habit being instilled in you to care for all, no matter who they are? To be a builder, to be a giver, to be a diakoneo, to be a server. And if not, here's the question. What's preventing you from doing that? Well, I have to grant you, it's easy to catch a fever of fear and anxiety in these days, isn't it? It's so simple to feel defeated by it. It's easy to want to stay in bed, pull the covers over your heads after you read the paper, just shut the world out, isn't it? So easy to want to do. Gosh. But you see, the Christian church, like this woman in our story, we're not called to idleness and despair and immobilizing worry. We're called by Jesus to service. And we were from the very beginning. In fact, Jesus never said, memorize doctrines. Jesus never said, you have to believe in the second person of the Trinity. But he did say, 87 times we have recorded in Scripture. That's 8-7. He said, get up and follow me. Get up, take my hand, and serve. Because when you're doing it to the least of these, you're doing it to me. I look out at the crowd. I think most of us remember 1973, right? 1973 is when I graduated from high school. 800 graduates. I was 12th in my class, alphabetically. Anyway, back in 1973, you may remember, back in 1973, Senator John Stennis was returning to his Georgetown home, and after a long day on Capitol Hill, and after parking his car, he began to walk towards the front door, and that's when it happened to him. Two people came out of the darkness, they robbed him, and they shot him twice. You remember? Well, news of the shooting of Senator Stennis, the Democratic chairman of the powerful Armed Forces Committee in Washington, shocked our nation to the core. For nearly 7 hours, Senator Stennis was on the operating table at Walter Reed Hospital, hovering between life and death. Well, a short time after the shooting, another politician in Washington was driving home when he heard about that shooting on the radio. And so he turned himself around on the Key Bridge and he drove directly to Walter Reed Hospital. When walking in the hospital, the politician noticed that the staff was swamped. They just could not keep up with the incoming calls about the senator's condition. So spotting this unattended switchboard, this politician sat down and he voluntarily went to work, continuing to take inquiring calls all night long until the sun came up the next morning. Sometime during that day, when things had quieted a bit, this politician stood up, he stretched, he put on his overcoat, and he prepared to go. And of course, by then, the other exhausted switchboard operators had begun to wonder who this other dedicated volunteer was. They'd never seen him before. So finally, one of them asked, and he simply responded, "My name is Mark Hatfield." Well, you can only imagine what happened when the media got hold of this. I mean, they could not contain themselves, sharing this story with every news outlet in America, that for 21 hours after Senator Stennis had been shot, that one of the senator's greatest critics in the Senate, the conservative Republican, Senator Mark Hatfield from Oregon, had inconspicuously and humbly served the good of the liberal Democrat Stennis and his concerned followers by simply answering the phones. When asked why he did it, Senator Hatfield simply responded, "I'm pleased that I could help." You know, folks, we're living in a world that's quite feverish, as we have divided ourselves along entrenched lines that seem so uncrossable. But it needn't be that way. Put your hand to your forehead. Have you been affected? Take your temperature. Have you been infected? Well, where some may see the fever spreading and becoming a pandemic of the soul in our world today, I happen to have another view. Like he did to this sick and infirm mother-in-law of Peter, I see Jesus reaching out his hand to us in these difficult times, urging us to get up and to serve as he did. Because I really do believe that this story of Jesus' healing of Peter's mother-in-law is calling boldly from 2,000 years ago, saying if we are ready for our fever to break, then all we need to do is take Christ's hand, stand up, and do what we were created to do in the beginning. Or the other way to say it is, get up, get out, and serve. And here's the promise of the story. It says if we do that, not only will our fever be broken, but the church will be born anew, again and again and again. Pray with me, please. Oh God, our hearts turn towards you, and we yearn for your truth. May what we struggle with this day come true, oh God. May it be so. May it be so. Amen.